Go back to elementary school, go back to
Oh,
middle
wow.
school, to high school, go back to college. Who were they? Right? Right. There are competencies that will pull A players through their entire life, and they're going to show up, and they're not even going to need to prepare for your interview because they're just going to be able to naturally answer questions about who they were their entire life. One of the best ways to get a pulse on the market is to speak with people who are in the market every day, right? So
100%.
hey, we're looking to pay, X dollars for this role. And that recruiter, that consultant's going to tell you, don't waste your time. Let's break down really underneath, like, what is the
The
need?
purpose. Yeah.
I think you've got to think about the goals that you have for these hires, right? And
Yeah.
think of them over a multi-year period. Like, okay,
Like,
so
what's
at
the
the end,
point?
so what do you really want to point the senior executive at that's really going to make a difference in how the company grows over the course of that year, right?
I
Or how
love
the
it.
company grows or whatever happens.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Founders Corner. Today's episode, I have a very special guest here with me, and his name is Greg Griesemer, and he is the founder and CEO of 1130 Works, an HR consulting for tech and early stage and biotech companies. And I'm super excited to have him here because he has a lot of insight when it comes to hiring and managing and people and all that fun jazz that we all want to do, but we don't have the time to do. So, Greg, welcome. How are you doing?
Good, doing well. So thanks for the warm welcome. I appreciate that.
Excellent. It's kind of funny. We were just doing this, and I screwed up a couple times. I'm gonna be honest about it, but I'm gonna blame it on your good looks. Like, how do you keep the like that skin? Like, come on, that's just not fair, Greg.
Well, I've got two young daughters, 12 and 14. They're part of the Sephora kids, generation. And so a lot of good creams and lotions.
There you
That's
go.
what I'm
They start teaching you, I guess. That makes sense. So, Greg, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and who you are and how did you get into HR and tech?
Yeah, absolutely. So after graduating college, got into law school, decided not to go, and I answered this ad that said, "Are you good with people, have no marketable skills, and want to make a lot of money?" And I said, that sounds like me to a T at that
That
point in
that
time.
sounds like a
So,
sales job.
well, it was a recruiting job, right? So I sit down in the interview. The guy says, "Do you know why you're here?" I'm like, "Nope." He said, "It's a recruiting job." And they
Right.
said, "But I'm not going to teach you how to recruit. I'm going to teach you long-term consultative selling, where the
Nice.
relationship is at the center of everything you do." So was really blessed to kind of find my way into that. It was, a traditional sort of headhunting role. Did that for a while, and then sent two applications in, one to Johnson and Johnson and one to Merck. And just like my father sort of worked in a blue collar job for 35 years, I said, I'm going to to work for one company for 35 years. Ended up getting hired at J&J at the time,
Right.
and they had a very tiny recruiting team, maybe 30 people, focused on a group of operating companies in one state in the US. When I left 7 years later, we were 250 people, and we had rolled out a centralized model across 18 different countries. So a
Wow.
lot of growth, a lot of growth, a lot of change management, communication experience at J&J. Went on to run talent acquisition for a number of different firms, and then found my way into a head of HR role at a specialty generic pharmaceutical company. As that company sort of reorganized and started to go through an exit process, and the plan was to sort of take the proceeds and start a tech spinoff, which fast forward 7 years after that, we're now exiting that tech business together, which is pretty cool. Having built that up after exiting a family business that was over 100 years old.
Yeah.
Really found my way into HR, and really an opportunity to bring a lot of big company experiences, processes, focus on quality and talent down market, and saw
Right.
a need within sort of the 50 person and under space, and specifically, leaned into biotech and pharma because that's what I knew. It's really all I knew in terms of my career, and that naturally expanded to tech. We started to take on some healthcare tech firms and then some more traditional tech firms, but we specialize, just with life science, a lot of biotech, clinical stage biotech, and then small tech startups as well.
So obviously you've been in the space for a very long time, and you deal with a very interesting niche market, which is cool, right? Like being in that smaller market it's a rarity, to be honest, to find people who are servicing that world. I always tell people, I say there's very little resources available to startups, right? As much as the all the cities kind of claim we have all the resources in the world, it's quite limited in the sense of understanding the startups life cycle and like how they function, how they think, because they come with the experience of, oh, there's someone here to coach you through fundraising, there's someone here to coach you through HR. But you're a founder yourself now. Like you were just mentioning how like being a founder, you kind of realize you go through the same stuff as they do. What what can a startup do in order to set themselves up for success, to be able to be able to be more prepared for the hiring process? Because when the hiring process hits, it hits fast and quick, and we tend to be reactive more than proactive.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. I think I get the question a lot as well. It's sort of like, when do we need someone like you? What should we
Right.
be thinking about? We're a zero person sort of grant funded company. We have a little bit of money that's been seeded to us by family and friends, and we're getting kind of started. What do we need to think about? And I think the first piece of advice is spend time waxing philosophical a bit with the founding team, right? Spend time on determining who you want to be as a company, how you want to treat your employees, what type of culture, because everything sort of flows down from there. You can't think
Right.
about policies if you haven't thought about sort of, what is the balance between trust and structure that we want to strike, for instance,
And
right? And we create these accountability mechanisms so we don't need them now because we're only two or three and we know each other and we went to school together or we did this together. But
right.
as you add people that you don't know, you will need some of this. And so I think just spending time thinking forward a little bit from a philosophy or philosophical perspective is a great place to start.
And to be frank, I don't know that you even know your processes yet, right? And being at a young company, especially at a, like 10, 20, like I would say 10 is your threshold. I think at 10, you kind of go to the next level, I think. Like 0 to
Yeah.
10, you're kind of just like a bunch of buddies working together in a garage kind of concept, right? And then you go past that 10, it's all like, okay, we need to start building out processes for how to hire, so we don't hire someone and then have to fire them the next day. So I do agree with you. I think processes are critical. I know for us, it was that 10 mark where it got
Yep.
kind of started getting challenging, and we were like missing little things, and we even had a couple of employees hired without having contracts.
Right.
Right? So like, oh my
I
god,
get it.
did that hurt you? Did that itch a little bit? Because I know
Yeah,
whenever I say that to HR people, they're just like, what? You didn't have a contract?
you didn't. I mean, you probably noticed the shift in the chair and
Yeah,
movement
yeah,
on the
you're
floor.
like, "Ooh, that's, why am I on this podcast?" Yeah, that's startup world though, right? Like, I don't know, I just feel like it's not a rare thing.
No, no. In addition to the philosophies, right, which you may not even get to till you're around that 10, and you already start to have a culture like, wow, we have a culture, because the culture is just an amalgamation of behaviors of the people
Right,
that work together, right? And you
right,
just try to distill it down into some values so you can create a standard set of expectations and behaviors for people that enter the firm. But
100%.
it's great to think through what you just mentioned, so the compliance platform that you're really working off, right? So that's where, look, you're under a couple people. You probably need an offer letter and you need a handbook. What do I need a handbook? There's only two of us. It's not for the two of you, right? It's for really to get acquainted with it, accustomed with it, make sure that you are checking boxes.
Right,
There's some grants that come with these type of requirements, right? So you're just establishing that compliance platform early, I think, helps, right? So you at
right.
least have some of the stakes in the ground you can build off of in the future. So,
Right. No, I agree with that. How do you go about hiring? What's like if you were to like kind of give advice to, a potential founder who's, let's say they've proven their market, they're starting to go, okay, I'm having some cash flow. I just raised another round, maybe a small round to get them to the next level, like a bridge loan. How do you suggest going about the hiring process? Is it the best? What's the best route? Because, you know, we entrepreneurs we tend to hire networks, right? Like within our network. Who do you know that I could use for this situation? And that's not always the best case scenario, right? And so I'm just curious what your thoughts are and how to approach hiring and how to think about hiring.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think be thoughtful and I like, well, no kidding, right? But I mean, what I mean by that is, but be
What does that
thoughtful
mean,
about,
Greg?
right? Like, are you looking at this as sort of the team that's going to get us from point A to point B is not going to be the team that's going to get us from B to C. Then
Okay, so interesting.
you're moving in a different way to say, look, I need what I need now. I know what I need to get to this next milestone for additional funding, for proof of concept, for an MVP that's launched, or if you're in the science world to get into a certain phase in the clinic. You know what you need from here to there, but you got to realize the people that you might attract into that stage of your company may not want to be on the next phase with you, and may not be appropriate for the next phase in the life cycle. So I use the biotech example because it's an easy one, and we just faced this with a client. Like, they're a discovery shop that's now starting to move some drugs into the clinic to be tested on humans. People who are in discovery, they do not want to deal with regulatory affairs and other people that are sort of starting to mess with the science. They're
Right.
just in love with the science, that they belong in discovery shops. And so you'll start to see some drop off and the attritional raise, as you move closer to the clinic. That's okay, right? You need to replace that discovery talent with preclinical talent or clinical talent anyway. And so I
Right.
think just being thoughtful about that and planful about it, then look, I'm leaning in here. These 10 people I'm bringing on to get us to point B, or six of them are not going to be appropriate from B to C. And I'm okay with that as a leader, as a founder, or as an owner. So,
Right, right, and I agree with that. Now that you brought up a good point, there is stages, and I always tell this to startups. You have the generalist, where you need them at the beginning. You need multiple hats. You need someone who can think on their feet and just kind of solve the problem on their own. And then you need the specialists, and the specialists are where you need to have someone hired who's just good at X. Like, for example, let's say Google Ads. If you're running a lot of ads and you're starting to get really busy and backlog, that's the factor where you go, okay, I have to find an expert. How do you manage how do you understand a generalist? Because I think generalists are the hardest people to find and hardest people to hire for, because everyone can speak being a generalist, but they cannot action being a generalist. Does that make does d- do you know what I mean by that? So
yeah.
I'll talk to people all the time and you read a book. That's good, right? Like, I get it. You understand the concepts, but can you actually execute? And I find execution is harder to find than people who actually understand what to do.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. And that's competency based hiring at its core, right? And so
Right.
what are the competencies that you need in that generalist role? And be relentless about going to find those, developing the right, screening questions to find the competencies. They're not experiences, and people sort of
Right.
jumble those at all times. To your point, if execution is it, then you just need to see a history of executing, right? If you need problem solving and the ability to sort of self manage, talk to me about how your history demonstrates that you've been able to do those things. And so it's, again, sort of taking the time to craft the competencies that you're really looking for in that general role. They're going to
Right.
bring one set of experiences. You might need somebody that's heavier in operations. You might need somebody that's heavier in finance. You might need somebody that's heavier in legal, depending on what it is. But if they can cover those other areas, get your IT set up, depending if you're not a tech company, get your HR set up until the time comes to hand off to a specialist. Those are people that can solve problems for you, but they have to have a certain competency set to get done what you want to get done.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I mean, like I said, it's one of the hardest things to find. But how do you vet them? Like, how do you vet history on generalists? Besides, like, seeing, like, okay, what have you achieved? I get that. I'm 100% with you. Okay, and here, Greg, I'll tell you why I say I'm asking this, because I see it all the time where people come into a startup world and they talk, but they don't walk, right? They're very
Mhm.
good at the talking part. They show you that they've done the walking part. Like, there's no way for you to vet that, right? Because unless you call the company and go, "Hey, I'm just confirming, have they done this? And like one of the big things about resumes and things like that is it's a lot of bullshit. Let's call it what it is, right? And people like lie a lot on them and
Yeah.
extend the truth and right. So, and the reason I'm asking because I've been in that situation where I hired someone based on um, even recently, even with my experience hiring so many people, I still got bamboozled, let's call it, right? Where it was like, okay, this guy understands what needs to be done. He's showing me work he's done. I get it. Okay, let's take the shot with him. Within first 2 weeks, I was like, you are definitely not. You oversold yourself, right?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
significantly oversold. And with third week, he was gone. So
Yeah.
hire slow, fire fast. But like, how do you check that? Like, that's my big thing right now. Is like, how can you possibly make sure? And this happens a lot with technical teams, right? Like
Mhm.
a non-technical founder will go and hire a technical person and say, here's what I want. There's no way they can verify if that person knows what they're doing, right? So I'm just curious if there's any other like pointers that you may have for a founder who's maybe in that scenario right now.
Yeah, I think, well, there's 2 separate kind of issues there,
Yeah.
Sep. I think the
The
latter is maybe
lying.
a little. Yeah, well, and I think there's the non-tech founder hiring somebody in tech. My advice there is go get tech help, right? From
Yes.
someone that you trust, that that's there are services now that are starting to come up that are pretty interesting, that where they sort of on demand can hire a technical expert to screen for whatever you're after, right? But
Correct.
you're right. That one I think is an experience, more of an experiential hire in that one. So you want
Correct.
to find some help, right? Bring some experts in and help fill the gaps that you don't have. On the competency-based hiring, though, how far are you going back? There's this concept, Brad Smart created it a long time ago called top grading. And this is an intensive interview. I'm not a fan of the entire methodology, but there's bits and pieces I think you can pull in, because the
Okay.
entire methodology is lock the person in a room and interview them for 8 hours. That's a bit of a
Okay.
it's a dramatic oversell of what that actually
Can
is.
do I
But
point a light at him too and in a dark room and
yeah,
just smack the table?
yeah,
Play good cop,
absolutely.
bad cop?
Yeah, 100%. You got people, voices from
Yeah.
all over. No,
A big glass mirror.
no. But the concept in top grading is go back deep into their history, right?
Right.
And the fundamental foundation of top grading is an A player has been an A player their entire life.
A
And
hundred
so
percent. Yes.
go back to elementary school, go back to
Oh
middle
wow.
school, to high school, go back to college. Who were they, right? Were they the student council, right? Were they we have safety patrols here in Pennsylvania, right? Were they team captains of sports, right? Did they participate more in life, right? Were they natural leaders? Were they
Right.
selected to be leaders, right? There are competencies that will pull A players through their entire life, and they're going to show up, and they're not even going to need to prepare for your interview, because they're just going to be able to naturally answer questions about who they were their entire life. And
You
so
know,
there is something about peeling these layers back, that, as far back as you want to go. It's like, why is who I was in middle school relevant? Well, let me tell you, who you were in middle school, forged the person that you were in high school. That person then sort of got you to college. That college got you to your first job. That first job got you promoted through and into new jobs, right? And so there is a relationship between the past versions of yourself and the other, the iterative versions of yourself.
you
So
know what? That's an excellent point actually, because I do. So before Corridor, before all of this, I mean, I had my first startup. I sold that startup. I kind of did my own thing. We pivoted at the end, but there was a little gap where I was looking for a job. And you
mhm,
know what? You're right. I was targeting startups. I wanted to be in the startup world because I do believe I'm a journalist. Well, I am a journalist because that's what I do. But it's funny. I never went prepared for an interview because, in my opinion, every interview is different, and so it depends on the business. So I asked more questions than I did answer questions. But then, based on my questions, I would ask, I would kind of give the route, and it almost came up as more free consulting. I found
yeah,
I feel like I walked away with giving more free consulting at the end of the day. like I remember I was doing this one interview with this one company, um, and I was like, well, where are you at with this? Sales, blah blah blah. They were paying a guy out of Toronto 150K a year salary with bonuses, and it's been 6 months, and he had brought zero revenue in.
Wow.
And so I said, look, like that doesn't make sense, right? Like theoretically, you should be around that 6 months. You should have at least one contract in your book, especially at 150K. That means you're not a junior. That means you're quite senior. Like you're up there. And
Mhm.
let's just say at the end of the day, I was not considered a fit because he had two guys in Toronto that were basically taking advantage of him.
Yeah.
And at that point, this is where I mean with you read too many books. He was like,
Yeah.
yes, but culture is important. So, they don't think you're a good fit for them, for the company. And I was like, they don't think I'm a good fit because I'm about to fire them and
Right.
expose that they're not doing anything. That's why I'm not a good fit for them. Um, because he loved me. The CEO loved me. And he was like, yes, this is all the problems I have. And I was like, here's why you're having those problems. Here's what you would do. Here's what the first and second thing I would do is. And he literally was like, yes, this is amazing. I need you to meet with these guys. I'm like, I don't know if you want me to meet with these guys because I think yeah, I'll meet with them because I want to know if they're taking advantage of you. And they were. And I don't
Yeah.
know what happened at the end with that company, but they're not on the news. And that was like 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So I think you're right. I think at the end of the day, if you can speak to it and almost kind of give free consulting advice, I think you're actually considered a good generalist because it does go back in history and you should be able to on your feet be able to do that. That's awesome. That's a good one, Greg.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
That's what I'm going to do
Absolutely.
next. Give me advice. Give me free consulting.
Yeah, well, and again, take me back to who you were as a kid, who you
Yeah.
were as a high school kid, who you were as a college kid, who you are now today, right? How have you grown? Like, and again, these are all going to point back. If you see somebody that's stuck, they've never really, grown emotionally, they've never
Right.
grown spiritually, they haven't grown their skill sets. They're not purposely growing their skill sets. This
Right.
is somebody, I mean, again, they're demonstrating who they are. And I mean, there is this sort of, cliche in HR, right? The past behavior is the best predictor of
Right.
future
Yeah.
behavior.
Yeah.
And
100%.
so, if you think that way and apply that concept, go back as far as you want to get an idea of who they were. How did they grow up? I mean, what environment sort of shaped them? Right. And how did they overcome something in their life? Did they not? This isn't prying personally, right? Because you got to be careful with some things that you ask, but you want to just get a sense of who they have been their entire life as a
Now,
person.
now that's a rigorous process, though, right? Like, I do agree with you. I think that's brilliant. But like, what is a founder who maybe doesn't even have an idea of this stuff? How does one vet, like, besides hiring Greg, right?
Yeah.
And to
Oh,
hire Greg,
yeah.
yeah, and hiring Greg is not cheap, right? But for good reason. Like, you do have like I do think there's value in recruiters and recruiting and HR and consulting. My big thing is so many of them are full of it, right?
Yeah.
Especially the big firms, in my opinion, they're just throwing whatever they can at the wall and seeing what sticks, right? I have a buddy of mine who is in recruiting. I have openly said that to him because he's like, you want, like, I can help fill out your roles. And I said, look, I'm sure, by all means, of course, if you want to send me people, I'll hire them and I'll pay you for it. But just know I have a 5-stage interview process and like it's rigorous and they have to pass through panel interview, they have to pass through technical interview. Let's just say I never got anybody,
Right.
right? For good reason, because to them that's a waste of time, right? Like to him that was like, okay, if I send this guy like 10, he's probably not even going to improve any of them past round 1 or 2. So what's the point of me putting in that effort, right? So I totally get it, but like, how do you as a founder manage the landscape of hiring? Because you do hear it all the time: find good people result to good companies, right?
Mhm.
But to find good people requires a good idea. That's the foundation. A good business model, good business plan. That's the first foundation. Charisma for a founder always helps,
Yeah.
but you need money to find
Right.
great people. So how have you seen some tech companies manage or kind of navigate that world?
Yeah, I think there's you're thinking, Sep, with that question, like strategies to
Yeah.
hire without leveraging like an external consultant or an external,
Well, even
you
if
know,
you are even if you are doing an external tech or sorry, an external consultant, how do you help pay for that? Like, how do you justify paying for that? Not the consultant, but like putting in that much effort. Because time and resource are the same thing to me, right? Like time, money, it's all resources that most founders don't have, whether it's time or money. Most
yeah,
of the time it's money than it is time. but
that's right.
but how do you manage finding great people without necessarily having all the funds to be able to do it?
Yeah, well, I think to start, if I was advising a founder in this space, I'd say
Yeah.
how important is this hire? Right?
Right.
Because if it's a critical hire, you got to have that as a company priority so everybody understands how important it is, right? If there's five of you
Yeah.
and all five of you to interview, then all five of you have to make the time. If the fifth one bags out on the interview because something else came up, then it's not a big enough priority for
Right.
the company. So I think first is set the appropriateness of the priority. I think there is, a tremendous value in speaking with a number of different firms. We joked earlier a little bit about give me free consulting advice, but I think one of the best ways to get a pulse on the market is to speak with people who are in the market every day, right? So
100%.
hey, we're looking to pay, X dollars for this role. And that recruiter, that consultant's going to tell you, don't waste your time, right? This is what
Yeah.
you're going to get. If you said to me, Greg, I'm going to hire a first HR person. And I was just in this conversation with a client 2 weeks ago, and they said, we have about half of what? And they were calling it a director. I said, that's not a director. That's sort of a coordinator level, right? In terms of the salary that you're after. So, but
Yeah.
let's break down really underneath, like what is the
The
need and
purpose. Yeah. That's
the
good.
purpose of this role? What are you looking to try to accomplish with it? Well, I just have to offload this work. Is that work now or is that work in 6 months? Is that work in a year? Because you could be experiencing a short-term pain now that's just a blip, right? And it's going to come back down. It's an up in the cycle. It's going to come back down and level out. And that headcount may not be needed right now. And
Right.
so I think being thoughtful about the triggers related to the release of that headcount, what's driving the need, again, the prioritization, and then do a little bit of benchmarking in the market to see where you are, right? That's all
Yeah.
free, right? That takes time, right? And energy and effort. But if it's a critical enough hire, it's gonna be well spent and you'll be in a better position to go to market for that role. If it's not a critical hire, you're gonna find out by talking about it repeatedly and speaking with folks that can help you think through that. You might not even need a full-time person. What it sounds like you need is maybe 8 to 16 hours worth of work. So let's look
Right.
at fractional resources, right? Instead. So
What do you think is the most important hire at a tech startup? Let's call it an early stage, let's say seed round, maybe pre-series A.
who's there already, I guess.
So yeah, fair enough. And to be frank, most of the times you have what the general tech guys, right? Like the developers. Let's put those guys aside. Usually the head tech guy is now considered the CTO, so he's managing all the tech stacks and the whatever. Then you have the founder. You typically have a couple of salespeople, maybe a couple of smaller roles, maybe someone in marketing. Um, but that's about it, right? Like that's your typical tech startup.
Yep. Yep. I mean, to me, it's an HR person. No, I'm joking about that because
I was literally gonna be like, "Now, Greg, let's be honest here."
you're about to end the podcast early,
I was like,
right?
you know what, my audience, I apologize. I did not vet Greg correctly. No,
That's correct. Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, I think I would probably have backed that up to say, if you've got a founder and a CTO, spend the time, money, energy on the tech team, right? And so this is sort of your first non-tech hire to me is sort of a chief marketing officer, right?
right,
Somebody that's really going to get the brand right, get the go-to-market approach right. Some like this is a go-to-market person. person, I think is really where you want to spend your first. Everything else can be outsourced. You can outsource HR, legal, finance, even your IT infrastructure. You can outsource all of that well into the future. I mean, you can get by until till you're 100+ person company with
Right.
outsourced. Depending again, you might need to bring the legal to keep outside firm costs down. You're going to probably bring somebody in if you're doing a lot of contracting work or whatever. There's ways to mechanize some of that too. But I think it's the go-to-market person from what
Right.
I've seen,
Okay.
and that's where the stumble.
So I agree with you. I think it is a CMO because I think that's the one thing is people hire CMOs or even salespeople too early, in my opinion. They do it at a pre-seed level, which is you really don't have a market. You haven't figured out who your customer is yet. You're really not seeing what the button that you're pressing is. You just have an idea. It's a thought, and they bring them in, and then they just keep shooting in the dark and missing, and then you get frustrated with them, going, "You're not giving me results." So I think at a seed, and seed is basically you have some sort of market. Pre-series A, you're pretty much okay. I know how to sell it. Now I just need
Mhm.
to scale it or get ready to scale it, I guess. So that's excellent. No, I like that advice. Well, besides a CMO, what's the one role not to hire? Ooh, trick question.
Probably HR. No.
We gotta exclude HR from this list that I keep asking.
No, no, no.
You know
What's the
what?
one
Here,
role?
if you want to talk about hiring HR, what's the best timing to hire in HR, outside HR help, or even in internal HR? When is the best time? And then we'll go back to the other question. I know
Yeah.
you want to talk about the HR world. Let's do it. Let's
No, no, no. I was just trying to probably overuse the joke a little bit. But no, I think what's the one person not to hire? That's a great question. What's the one
I have
person
one in
not?
mind. I'm just wondering if you have it.
Yeah. I think it's early to hire like a COO, like
Yes.
like an operator. Were you thinking the same? Because to
Yes.
me, that's just
And you'd be
not.
surprised how many of them actually do hire COOs.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That to me is just a role that you've got to be looking to accomplish something with that role, right? Like bringing an operations person in, there has to be a really clear multi-year remit or an organization that's sort of grown, and you've now got a CEO whose span of control has spread so wide that you all of a sudden there's 15 direct reports, and he's like, "Look, I got to layer here and get 7 or 8 of them out." So I can get down to a true, and look, you can argue there's only three roles really in a company. There's selling and marketing. There's operations, which is creating or distributing or servicing, right, as a
Yeah.
product. And then you've got like finance and administration that can kind of be grouped
Yes.
together, right? And so where does your operator sort of sit there? Well, you've got to start collapsing things, right? Operations in a tech startup is the CTO and the team that's developing the product, right? Finance, I don't think it's ever too early to bring a CSO in. They can't, especially if they're spending time fundraising and managing, money, but that you could also accomplish that with a fractional CFO, and an outside accounting firm, right? So you
So
don't need that. I think the COO
yeah.
to me would be the one you don't want to hire too
So
early.
the two are for me are CFO and COO. And you'd be
Yeah.
surprised how many startups do CFO and then they hire CFO under your basis that you just mentioned, which is to help them raise money. And in fact, if you get a good CEO that does do that, then they're worth the hire. But typically, what happens is they come in, they say, "Okay, yeah, yeah, I'll manage the money, and I'll help get us into the doors,"
Yep.
which they never do,
Yeah.
right? Like they never do, and you just end up paying a salary for whatever amount of year. And CFOs are, as soon as you put in the title CFO, all of a sudden they're like 150, 200K, right?
Yeah.
So I do agree with you. I think just an accounting firm, if you're just doing books, I think an accounting firm is more than enough. Like Corridor to this day doesn't have a CFO. And I've met some I've met some startups where they're like, yeah, and let's meet our CFO, and I'm like, there's 5 of you. Why do you have a CFO? What? Like, oh yeah, he helps me raise money, and I'm like, oh cool. Like, you've been around for 6 months. How much money have you guys raised? And he's like 0. And I'm like, he seems worth it. I like this
Yeah.
guy.
Yeah.
And this is why I kind of brought up with the original question, Greg, is like, how do you vet these guys, right? Because this happens so often where we
Yeah.
just make terrible hire decisions, right? And it's not that we're rushing it. Sometimes it is because we're rushing it, but like it's sometimes we're just being sold to, right?
Mhm.
And when you're being sold to that sense, like I've again, it's happened to me multiple times. It happened to me with one of my first partners. It happened to me actually with multiple of my partners, where it was like, okay, you take care of this, I'll take care of this, and away we go. And they just never take care of this, and there's always a
Yeah.
fight at the end, right? Um, so that's why I was asking. And then on the COO side, I think I agree with you. It's if anything, if you don't have a good CTO, you should hire a COO, but a technical COO, because then that
Right.
technical CEO can help you hire and manage the operations of your tech
Yeah.
team and production. Because
Right.
what a
Yeah.
lot of people don't realize is when you're building a tech company, your product is your business.
Yeah.
They're not separate. I don't know why people think of it as separate. Like, oh, the tech team, they're their own group. That tech team can
Yeah.
very quickly destroy your business,
Right. Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Yeah.
So that to me, I think those are the two. So you're bang on with the COO thing because a lot of times they bring a COO just to do tasks, and that's not. It's not a good use of the COO's time.
Yeah, that's why it's so important. Although you won't see a real formal goal setting process too
No.
early in early stage companies, but I think you've got to think about the goals that you have for these hires, right? And
Yeah.
think of them over a multi-year period. Like, okay,
Like,
so
what's
at
the
the end
point?
of the year,
Yeah.
what's the point? Yeah, what are you really looking for this person to accomplish? At the end of the year, how are you going to look back and say, hey, I hired Greg as the COO. He did a great job because he did what? Like, what do you really like
Yeah.
managing
Yeah.
tasks,
Yeah.
sort of coordinating things is not it's not a COO job, right? That's
Yeah.
so what do you really want to point the senior executive at that's really going to make a difference in how the company grows over the course of that year, right?
I
Or how
love
the
it.
company goes or whatever happens. So,
I love
yeah.
it. So, Greg, if you were to give one advice to a founder that's standing in front of you and pouring their heart out and going, Greg, I really need your help. Just give me one advice. What would that advice be? It could be
Oh,
anything.
well,
It doesn't have to be HR. So don't say don't hire an HR.
no, no, no. I already used that joke, overused it once. I won't use it twice. So, what's the one piece of advice?
Go get them.
That's
Yeah.
it. Yeah, I mean, look, I think as I've spoken to early stage founders and leaders, everybody's bringing such a diverse set of problems or a set of goals or what they're trying to
Hmm.
to
Accomplish.
accomplish. Yeah, and I think again, my one piece of advice, just because of the chair I sit in, would be to just think forward, right?
Yeah.
Think
Be
forward
proactive
as
versus reactive.
as far as you can. Think
Yeah.
forward in all aspects of the business. I'm always and continue to be surprised at how short-sighted small company leaders, founders are, and they're really thinking sort of from I can't plan beyond 6 months. That's just not true, right? That's
No,
just
that
not true. So
you can
I
you
think
can plan. Now, will it happen is a different story. And to be honest, and to be you're right, you should plan beyond 6 months, but you also have to be flexible enough to be able to adapt every single month. I think startup world is a fast-paced game. It's one of the fastest paced game out there. It changes on the month to month basis, but you have to plan a year to 2 years out minimum. Yes, it will change in the next 6 months, but you still need to plan it. I agree with that. I love
yeah,
that.
and set that 1 to 2 year plan, but have quarterly check-ins on
Yeah.
those goals. Now, like right now, you should be thinking about, okay, Q2 is around the corner, like from a fiscal calendar year, if you're just using, Jan 1 to December 31st. What do we really need to accomplish in Q2? Right? That should be set against a backdrop of a plan that goes into the early part of
Right.
2025, right? Maybe
Yeah.
into first, second, or second quarter. And so what do we really need to, and to your point, right? You're now 90 days away, you're going to have the opportunity to reset again, right? And that may change the landscape in front, but if you're always keeping an eye, 12 to 18 months out, and you're doing quarterly kind of resets, you're gonna, and this is across. This isn't just an HR.
Yeah.
This is a business thing,
Yeah.
right? It's really
100%.
what you want to accomplish. So,
Cool. Greg,
yeah.
thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate all your advice and thoughts. Being in that chair, it's important because I do think that people are such an important part of success for startups, and we just don't think about it. We always think of the product, not the people. It's kind of awkward and weird that we don't think about the people who are going to be driving it forward. So
No, I appreciate the time today, Sep. And again, to your point, just in the closing thoughts a minute or two
yeah,
ago,
yeah,
the people, are controlling the product. The product is the company. So there is a very intimate connection between these in the tech startup world. And so there should definitely be more attention paid, to it. So
think 3 to 4 years out. Exactly. Right. So
absolutely.
awesome.
So,
Greg, thanks so
all right.
much. And to everybody back at home, thank you all for listening in to today's episode of Founders Corner. If you like and subscribe, if you like this video, please subscribe. And if you know anybody that would take some value from this, please do share. It's what keeps us driven to keep making these episodes. Until next time, Corridor out.